Hey, no, 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 no. Ugh! Don't you hate that? You work for hours finishing your homework or a document that your boss is expecting tomorrow, and bam, the dang thing freezes, and then everything disappears to return without your file. Well, I'll tell you something. I used to use the Windows operating system exclusively. We'll call it OS for short. I was plagued with blue screens and freezing windows and crashing programs all the time. That is, until I was introduced to a different system called Linux. I plan on telling you a few good points about Linux and a few bad points about Windows. To be fair, I will also tell you about some of the bad points of Linux and some good points about Windows. Hopefully, I will cause you to think twice about what OS you're using and paying for. Truthfully, I'd like to switch most of you to Linux. First, let's talk about Linux and its good points. The first good point that I'd like to talk about is the fact that there are a hundred times more viruses for Windows than there are for Linux, according to facts from searchenterpriselinux.com and securityfocus.com, sorry. Another good point would be the price of the software. Linux is free to download and install on as many computers as you would like. The software for most of the distributions is also free. Try that with Windows and you might just get yourself in trouble with the law. According to the end user license agreement, you have to purchase one license or copy of the OS for each computer you want to install on. That could be a lot of money. I used a word in there, distribution. There are literally hundreds of versions or distros with different looks and software bundles for someone to choose from. Lastly is the fact that you don't have to keep getting the latest hardware to run the latest version of Linux. For instance, Ubuntu, the version of Linux that I run on my laptop, only recommends a 700 MHz processor and 384 megabytes of RAM. In comparison, Windows 7 coming up here in a few days requires, not recommends, but requires 1 gigahertz processor and 1 gigabyte of RAM. Those are some of the good points of Linux, and I said I would be fair and show some bad points. The first bad thing about Linux is that there's sometimes a lag between the bleeding edge hardware when it comes out and when Linux can use it. This is due to the fact that companies that do write a driver for their hardware for Linux is usually making sure that the one for Windows works first. Then they, on a second thought, go, oh, here's Linux community, here's your driver. Otherwise, you have to wait for the Linux or for the driver to be reverse engineered by the brains that run Linux, and then they can release it. Second is that some people are used to working with one particular piece of software and find that it will not work on Linux right out of the box. The gaming community will be extremely disappointed to find that there isn't a copy of the latest high-end games written for Linux. And lastly, the one point that I used for good can also be a bad point. There are literally over 100 distributions of Linux released on distrowatch.com. Why is this bad? Because it can overwhelm some people. Too much can be a bad thing. Although it is against my good judgment, I will add some good points to talk about Windows OS. The big thing for most people is that it just plain works. A lot of people don't want to think about using the computer. The computer is there to make their lives easier. That is the big reason why Windows is so mainstream. Today's society on a whole has been brought up on Windows OS. Lastly, all the new high-end hardware has drivers written for the latest version of Windows. Now comes my fun part, the part where I get to bash Windows. I don't know how many of you have run Vista before, but it tends to be a lot slow. I timed the boot time, the time that it takes from the time that I push the button to the point where I can type in my password, and it took Vista about a minute and a half. I did the exact same test on Ubuntu, the version of Linux I run, and it took 26 seconds. Another bad part of Windows is that when you get the latest version of Windows, you just might need to upgrade your hardware due to minimum requirements. Most Windows upgrades need more hard drive space or memory space. The first part of this speech was about viruses. Like I said before, there are a lot of out there for Windows. Some 60,000 reported by SecurityFocus.com way back in 2003. There have been 6 years since then, and they could only have multiplied. Last, Windows can be expensive. To purchase a copy of Windows 7 Home Premium, the cheapest full version out there, you'll have to drop somewhere around $200. The upgrade, which is if you already have Windows and you want to move up to Windows 7, will cost you $119. Now it's your turn. I've given you a lot to ponder as far as some of the good points. I have plenty more information about goods and bads of both Linux and Windows, and I am open for any questions that you may have. I really hope that a lot of you will give Linux a try, even if you don't like it. At least I've opened your mind to something other than cookie-cutter computing. So, if you want to give it a try, send me a message and I will gladly tell you what you need to know to give it a go. Thanks for listening, and I hope to hear from you all.